Hello, everybody, and welcome to a congressional briefing on the constitutional need for the Kids Online Safety Act. I'm Dawn Hawkins. I serve as CEO at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. I'm very grateful to be joined today with this incredible panel and to have many of you here with us from congressional offices and the media. To introduce, I just want to share how critical the Kids Online Safety Act is. COSA. It's an essential bipartisan child protection bill that was approved on July 30th by the Senate, 91-3. That is an astonishing margin and so much unity. But digital platforms, social media apps, they are dangerous. And as of yet, they are left unregulated and with no accountability. They facilitate unprecedented harms to kids online, including preventable deaths. Members of the Senate Commerce Committee and the Judiciary Committee have thoroughly investigated these platforms, this issue. There have been multiple hearings. They've listened to whistleblowers, to tech experts, to constitutional lawyers, to survivors and advocates. COSA is the product of extensive research and consultation. But big tech fights every attempt to curb these harms, to curb these solutions, including spreading disinformation about COSA. A Wall Street Journal investigation released last week revealed that tech has spent $90 million on lobbying against bills like COSA over the last 3 years. One very cynical tactic is to claim to the Democrat offices that it undermines LGBTQ plus speech, while whispering to the Republican offices that it undercuts pro-life speech. By soaking these divisive issues, big tech sows confusion and they're stalling progress, while more children are harmed and some die. Kids cannot wait, and families cannot wait for Congress to take action. COSA has to pass this year. After this briefing, we hope that you will agree and that you'll encourage your boss to co-sponsor COSA as a sign that you reject cynical, inaccurate claims by companies who are so mesmerized by mad profits that they sacrifice the national well-being. To start, we're going to have two panels. The first panel, we're going to discuss social media harms and the need for COSA in the courts. Joining us, we have Andrew and Rhonda Burris, who are survivor parent advocates. They lost their son, Cruz, at 15 years old in 2023 to a fentanyl overdose after he purchased what he believed to be Percocet through social media. And then we'll have Representative Brandon Guffey share with us. He's a South Carolina state representative and ferocious advocate who lost his 17-year-old son, Gavin, in 2022. Gavin was on Instagram where he met predators posing as a teenage girl. And then we'll be joined by Laura Marquez Garrett, who's a Harvard-trained attorney at the Social Media Victims Law Center in Seattle. She represents hundreds of victims of gross and preventable harm and negligence on social media platforms. We'll drop their full bios in the chat for you. But to get started, Andrew and Rhonda, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting us today to join the panel. My name is Rhonda Burris and my husband's Andrew Burris. Our son Cruz was 15 when he was poisoned by fentanyl. He will be forever 15 as of January the 18th of 2023.
Cruz was a victim of a social media predator that he connected through via Snapchat. Apparently these days, the drug dealers find the Snapchat platform very convenient. In fact, more convenient. It's easier to get a drug off Snapchat than it is to get a pizza delivered to your home. As Ron indicated, that we lost Cruz on January 18th, 2023. I'm going to kind of backpedal a little bit and tell you a little bit about Cruz. Nicholas Cruz Burris, we call him Cruz, very, very live, very vivid young man. He was very, very intelligent. He was very experimental. He wanted to know the world. He wanted to know everything. This young man was just so bright. He could have an intelligent conversation and speak to the level of a 5-year-old when he was babysitting our neighbor's house, kids, children. and up to an adult. He could have a very intelligent conversation with an adult. You would think that, Cruz really wasn't 14 or 15 years old at that time. Cruz had many interests as a child. As growing up in his teen years, him and his friend had dreams of becoming a NASA engineer, to being a musician. He also had talents and admiration to become a general contractor, as Rhonda and I rehab homes, as well as perhaps with his good capacity of speaking and debating that perhaps he would get into politics and maybe that someday be a member of our Congress. But at any rate, our whole life's dreams shattered on the evening of January 17th, 2023, as I indicated. He got a connection with the social media platform Snapchat Predator, also known as a drug dealer, and made arrangements to have a pill delivered. Wednesday, a school night on it was Tuesday evening, which was the 17th of January, which was a school night. The evening of the 17th, Rhonda and I went to sleep quite early that night. No excuses, we're parents and we work full time. Well, we were in bed by 9 or 10 o'clock at night. It was at that time Cruz made despicable conversation with a drug dealer who was 19 years old. The drug dealer knew Cruz was a minor, he was 15 years old. They made arrangements through Snapchat because it was a platform that the drug dealer thought all the conversation just disappeared. They made arrangements that after Torrin Bauman, now found guilty in the court of law, or he admitted guilt, that he made a delivery to our house approximately 11:30 p.m. when Ron and I were sleeping. He parked in front of our house where Cruz met him outside. In exchange for $20, Cruz thought he was buying a Percocet pill, laced with fent, whatever Cruz thought.
Called it fent.
Yeah, would have been. Ron had the unfortunate event of waking him up at 6:30 in the morning on Wednesday morning, as she usually does. And I'll let her tell her story from here.
Oh, no, you can finish.
Rhonda went to wake up Cruz only to find him laid on his side of his bed, with still holding his cell phone. And the reason he was holding his cell phone because he was FaceTiming his two closest friends. As a leader of their friendship group, he wanted to show them how cool he was by purchasing a pill from an online drug dealer. He wanted to show them him ingest the pill and get high, become warm and fuzzy. What they witnessed was Cruz ingest the pill. They watched him stop breathing. They watched him collapse and die. They didn't know he was dying. They attempted to text his sister, who was fast asleep, to check on Cruz. They thought he was tweaking. They were afraid to call us. Rhonda found him again that morning and screamed, and the whole investigation process started about that. Rhonda and I have very valid concerns regarding our social media, as well as iPhones, as well as our networks. I'll let Rhonda kind of take over.
All right, the iPhones, we had a hard time getting in there to get our evidence. Finally, it went from our police to the KBI, who after a year, like, we're not getting into this phone. They gave it to the Secret Service, who had it open in 24 hours. So that kind of is what led to the arrest of the person who sold it to him. I just want to point out that Snapchat is a platform that allows predators to come in. Snapchat deletes everything, usually within 24 hours, so there's no evidence. So without Snapchat allowing the marketing and the distribution of illicit drugs, our son would still be alive. And quite honestly, the biggest asset a country has is their youth. And we are allowing our youth to be killed off in droves right now from fentanyl. That should not be happening. Thank you for listening.
And Rhonda and I pray that the NCOSE gets passed.
Yeah, kids need to be kept safe online. And these platforms, they know they have the algorithms. to catch these predators.
Thank you, Andy and Rhonda, so much for your tireless advocacy. I've heard about Cruz, multiple times now as we've worked together for this legislation, and it doesn't become easier. And what doesn't become easier is also knowing that we've sat in meetings with these big tech companies, asking them to make these kinds of changes for years, and they haven't done so when they know what's happening on their platforms. And the only reason that they're going to step up to take this action is if Congress acts, if we mandate that there's just common sense minimum standards across the board. Thank you so much. Representative Guffey, we're grateful to have you joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Having a little bit of trouble hearing about Cruz, but I lost my 17-year-old son, Gavin Guffey, July 27th, 2022. Lost him due to the crime of extortion. And I'd love to tell you so much about Gavin. As a father, I feel like I have lost the battle in trying to save my kid. And this isn't about Gavin. This is about stopping the next kid. I've met many friends in my advocacy work, and they will be friends for life, but under unfortunate circumstances, such as what's happened to Cruz. There's just so many kids, but I'm tired of seeing kids die daily while we have Congress playing politics, and I'm watching money go around. I'm watching the misinformation on the Kids Online Safety Bill going to Republicans, going to Democrats, and spreading false information. And it's nothing more than a special interest lie in order to stop this bill from being heard. And me personally, I feel that every kid that dies, every one of our members that are not taking this seriously and hearing it, that they are to be held responsible as well. This has to stop. We have a duty as representatives to protect the most vulnerable, which are our children. And under the Kids Online Safety Act that is trying to get passed, we've seen how bipartisan and unanimous it was. Well, not unanimous, but close to it within the Senate. And we've watched the games as it's come over to the House. But if we had the duty of care in place that COSA puts, then situations like what happened with Gavin, the person that extorted Gavin was on Instagram, caused him to take his life. It only took an hour and 40 minutes online before he took his life. The investigation caused that one profile to be pulled down, but Meta left up all the additional profiles that were associated with that account. Not to mention how many other kids that those profiles could have been extorting, or how many additional lives that they caused simply by leaving them up. If I send you a friend request, I can choose to block this person and any new profiles that they put up. But yet Meta knows this is a criminal and left the additional profiles online, to where they began to extort my 14-year-old cousin, my 16-year-old son who just lost his brother, and even me. And they went as far as within 30 days sending me a message saying, "Did I tell you your son begged for his life?" And Meta left these predators up. They pulled down 63,000 extortion accounts off of one platform. And that was off of Instagram in one country within one day in Lagos, Nigeria. And we should be happy about that. But at the same time, did they hold all of those until they could pull them down at one time so they could get a good PR bump? And if they didn't, then that tells me that they have the ability to pull down these criminals right away. So they didn't do that either. COSA allows for stronger safety settings. We're not talking about blocking the information that kids can see. Kids can still search. If kid is struggling with their identity and they are looking for help, they will still be able to search and find things. but kids should not have these narratives shoved down their throat. If a girl wants to lose 5 pounds to fit into a bikini and she just searches trying to lose a little bit of weight, she shouldn't have these algorithms feeding her onto these chat boards with people struggling with eating disorders. And it also creates a standard of transparency, you know, being able to see how these algorithms are being used on our kids and allowing third party public interest groups or academic groups to be able to review it. I mean, these are huge steps. And the last time that we stood up and said we're going to protect kids online was in 1998. And a lot of people get a laugh out of this, but I'm dead serious whenever I say it. It took me an hour to download a Wu-Tang Clan song in 1998. That was if no one called and interrupted while I was trying to download it. That's how much our internet has changed. And yet, year after year, we are watching the lobbying money come in. We are watching, and what's most disheartening to me as a Republican, as more of a libertarian focused Republican, is I'm watching those who I thought were the righteous people or the people that were fighting the swamp have become the swamp. They're taking the money, they're poisoning bills, they don't want to hear bills. And, you know, even going as far as getting, you know, things for their district. But it is frustrating, and it really disturbs me. And it's time for us to stand up and say, you know what? No more. We don't want another Gavin. We don't want another Cruz. I don't want to have to meet another family that has lost a child that has to go through this. So I urge all of you to please do whatever research that you need, ask any questions that you need, but let's get this bill heard and let's get it passed today.
Thank you so much, Representative Guffey. You guys, Congress has not taken action to protect our kids online in 25 years. In 25 years, tens of thousands of our young people are impacted because of this lack of any kind of accountability and minimum standards. Laura, I'm going to pass it on over to you now to share some more about the impact in the court.
All right. Good afternoon. Social Media Victims Law Center. We are a small Seattle firm formed at the end of 2021 to represent children and families harmed by social media products. These are not issues of content. They're issues of design and product liability. I actually want to start, though. I mean, it's difficult to hear these stories. I want to start by saying I'm not here today or doing any of this work because I'm an attorney. I'm here because I'm a parent who happens to be an attorney. My children currently are 4, 6, 9, and 9. In fact, the 4-year-old is home with a cold today. Hopefully he won't be barging in. But in January 2022, I was an equity partner in Big Law. I had the beautiful corner office and represented companies like the ones that will be covered under NCOSE. I read SMVLC's first complaint in January 2022 when it was filed. It was about an 11-year-old girl, Selena Rodriguez, who died by suicide, posted that to Snapchat. And that was 2 years after her social media use began, without her parents' knowledge or consent. And by the way, I have seen her medical records. I have seen her school records. This is a child who was thriving and doing quite well until social media came into the picture. I had spent 20 years representing designers, manufacturers, and distributors. And when I read that complaint, when I looked into the issues further, it became apparent that these companies were harming kids as a matter of design, and what's more, that they knew what they were doing. 30 days later, I started with SMVLC. Now, that was less than 3 years ago. We have since been retained by more. I actually wish it was hundreds of families, which was said at the outset. We have been retained in under 3 years by more than 3,600 American families in all 50 states. That's 3,600 families have retained a small law firm, 6 attorneys in Seattle, Washington, in under 3 years. We have been retained in connection with the worst harms imaginable: addiction, exploitation, and death. This is the worst kind of addiction. And what's more, that is how the companies have designed these products. It is in their own documents. The documents released in 2021 by a Facebook whistleblower, the documents in the litigation, and the recent Attorney General complaints. Now, I personally have met with hundreds of children and families, law enforcement experts, and I've also seen their account data firsthand. And I know for a fact that every day without NCOSE is a day we are losing more children to these preventable harms. And I want to give you just a few examples. I have seen TikTok accounts where a child, a 10 or 12-year-old child, searches for BMX racing and gets blackout challenges. Another instance where a 16-year-old boy searched for inspirational quote. That's the exact search he ran after his first heartbreak. He got thousands of "no one will ever love you" and suicide promoting videos instead. 11 days ago was the 2-year anniversary of his death. And actually, I would actually like to take a little break with a question I'm seeing, which are incentives. I want to make clear the reason these companies are doing this to kids, the reason when a child searches for inspirational quote, and instead of getting inspirational quote, gets extreme videos, it's about engagement. Because if instead the videos they were pushing to these children were inspirational quotes, that child might log off and go talk to a friend, a family member, a teacher. And we see this over and over. It's again in their own documents. I have seen parents write to these platforms and say, "my child is under 13, I do not consent," and they are ignored. Or the platform will close down a single account and then allow the child to open 2 more on the same device. These platforms collect device ID. They know when the same device is being used. They know when the same photos are being used, when the same bio is being used. I have seen children and parents report drug menus and get the response from Snapchat that it doesn't violate the terms of use. In one case, a father reported dozens of Instagram accounts connected to the predator who sextorted his son. He begged Meta to go to the FBI. We have those photos in our complaint. He wrote to Meta, "children are dying. Children are dying because you are not doing anything. Please go to the FBI. Here are dozens of accounts that are connected, same photo, similar name, similar bio." To this day on Instagram and Facebook, many of those accounts are still up. In fact, in this last September, the same day Meta announced that it had implemented new teen settings, this father accidentally hit the Facebook app, which he no longer uses, and Meta recommended to him that he add one of those accounts as a friend on Facebook. These are just a few examples. I have many, and in fact, on addiction, shortly after starting this work in early 2022, I had a doctor from Orange County call me and say, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that we used to tell parents who came in with social media issues with their children to take away their phone." Too many of those parents came back and said, "my child has died. My child died by suicide after we did what you recommended we do." And so they no longer recommend that parents do that. That is how dangerous these products are being designed. When asked in federal court what duties they owe to children to design a reasonably safe product, right? So big tech, they were asked this in federal court in the MDL, and their answer was no such duty exists under the laws of the 50 states. They argued that they have no duty to design a reasonably safe product. COSA, lastly, COSA is about design, not content. I personally did not come out and support a COSA until early 2023. Its original iteration back in 2022, I had concerns about censorship. I had many of the same concerns big tech is sort of trying to plant everywhere now. But I promise you there were changes made and those concerns were resolved. Under the COSA that made its way through the Senate 91.3, there is no violation for hosting. There is no issue under COSA for making available to users what they ask to see. There are basic and reasonable duties of care that, frankly, we shouldn't need a statute to impose. Every other industry is subject to reasonable and basic duties of care. To be clear, under COSA, a company could never take down a single piece of content and be in full compliance, or they could take down everything someone might find objectionable and be in violation. In essence, these companies do not need to moderate content to stop harming kids, and they know it. The issue is that under COSA, they will need to make material changes to their products, material changes that they do not want to make because it will decrease engagement. These are design features entirely in their control. This has nothing to do with what these platforms host or how consumers access information of their own free will. And that is the problem, because once we stop letting them exploit kids, they're going to have to play by the same rules as every other industry. I want to offer anyone who's listening, no matter who it is, if you have any questions about COSA, I'm happy to put on my lawyer hat. I'm happy to walk through provisions. I promise you, anything big tech says, let's walk through it. Let's talk about it from a pure legal perspective. I will spend as much time as needed. We can go through and we can talk about those provisions. I support COSA 100%. We need a strong COSA, not a Section 232.0. And we need this yesterday. And I am imploring you to not wait another year. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. One question for all of you. It's the question I hate so much, and I'm going to ask it to you guys. I get so angry. I'm a mom of 5 myself, and I hear over and over again from congressional offices, from people who are questioning the need for COSA. What about the parents? Shouldn't the parents be, involved in stopping our kids from being on these platforms or being exposed to these things on these platforms? And what do you have to say to those folks?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
My background started off in tech and advertising. So I am very familiar with the way that algorithms work. I'm very familiar with the way that these companies are. I thought that I was protecting my kid because I used every parental control feature that was available through Apple. I was confident that my son was not looking at pornography. However, whenever we got his phone back, we found out that he had 3 Twitter accounts. One was his basic Twitter, the other 2 were full pornography. And this is a platform that is allowing 13-year-olds on it. That and Reddit do not show up. We are so busy trying to protect our kids from the outside world that you have a false sense that the kids are okay online. But how are they okay? I mean, I had a phone call last week from a mother who had a 7-year-old that was watching videos online and tried to choke himself. Now, this was just watching a kid video, and the algorithm sent them the next video was a choking challenge. We can't helicopter parent and guard everything that our children see. And we understand that that's not the government's responsibility. What we are saying is the government has a job to protect children, and we need to put these safeguards in place to let these companies know, just as we do with alcohol. You could say that, it's not the government's job to tell your 12-year-old not to drink alcohol, but we sure as hell have laws in place that say that you must be a certain age to buy it. Why can't we have the same safeties online so that we have a little bit of hope in protecting our kids, to know that it's not about the profits over protecting our families?
And I want to add to that, parents cannot compete with billion-dollar corporations. Look, there is a public meta document out there with brain scans in it. They have psychologists and these professionals that are on their product development teams talking about how do we best exploit these vulnerabilities, right? We have parents who never gave their children phones, parents like these folks who use parental protections, kids who are being exploited on school laptops. Right. So this is a hugely pervasive problem. And frankly, there's no way that these companies are designing these products in order to get past parental consent. They are actively interfering with parental rights. And the fact is that the only way parents are even going to stand a chance is with something like COSA, right? Something that requires them to disclose, to be transparent, to actually have parental control systems in place, and to act on actual knowledge. I know these companies like to say, we don't know how old these kids are if they tell us. And frankly, that is a lie, and that is in their own documents, because when they are doing marketing and product development, they have estimated ages for every account. And when they're telling marketers, pay us for these ads, they are saying, hey, this is a kid who's under 18. Well, that's funny because that kid said they were 92 when they signed up. And so that is what is happening. It is a lie, and they're getting away with it. And parents do not stand a chance under the current system where there is no transparency and no regulation, and these companies know it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to our second panel. We'll come back to the 4 of you with some questions at the end. We're going to talk now about Big Tech Lies, about First Amendment concerns in COSA. For this panel, we have Professor Mary Graw Leary, who's a professor of law at Catholic University, Columbus School of Law. She's also a former federal and state prosecutor and a recognized expert in criminal law and human trafficking. She regularly serves as a consultant for NCMEC. We've got Benjamin Bull, my colleague. He's a noted constitutional lawyer and former prosecutor. He's our general counsel at NCOSE and directs our law center, which is leading litigation to fight child sexual abuse and exploitation online. Before NCOSE, Ben led litigation at Alliance Defending Freedom. And among the young lawyers he mentored, interestingly, is Speaker Mike Johnson. So Ben, use those strings. We'll turn it over to you first, Mary, and then to you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Don. And before I begin, I want to again thank Representative Guffey and Mr. and Mrs. Burris. These are incredibly important stories. And what I would say to the people working on whether or not this bill will pass is I beg of you as an academic and as a former prosecutor, as someone who is spending her career focused on exploitation and making sure our laws are constitutional, listen to the people on the front lines, listen to these attorneys, to what's really happening. My job here is to tell you how we got here, because this isn't a situation without history. And it's really important for us to understand the depth with which big tech has created this scenario. I'm going to bring it to you from a legal lens. So let's put this in context. Before 1998 and 1996, this little thing happened somewhat unintentionally in Congress. Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act was created. It was designed by Congress to give narrow, limited immunity to Good Samaritans, to platforms in this new thing called the internet, the dial-up internet, which in 1996, the average use was 30 minutes per week per person. It was designed for those platforms to be able to clean up their platform and not to get sued. That was the purpose. But what happened in the intervening nearly 30 years? Big tech went on a conscious and intentional litigation strategy as well as legislative strategy to expand that narrow immunity to something that is now referred to as de facto near absolute immunity, essentially arguing that those few words in this bill didn't mean what they said, didn't mean what Congress intended. They actually meant that they are immune from suit and from prosecution for almost everything they do. Justice Thomas has called this a, quote, get out of jail free card. He's raised serious questions about this because today they have received immunity for facilitating human trafficking, distributing pornography, sending children some of the videos we've talked about where children have self-asphyxiated. And they've done this all knowing that this is going to negatively affect children. A recent study from Harvard told us that the reason for this is clear. $11 billion in profits coming from this age group in just a couple of years. Justice Thomas has said the following, and it's important to understand the context about how they've done this. In the platform's world, they are fully responsible for their websites when it results in constitutional protections. But the moment that responsibility could lead to liability, they disclaim any obligations and enjoy greater protections from suit than nearly any other industry. No other industry can claim we're not responsible for our for the problems we create. Now, let me be clear. The Senate, and then later the House, but let's focus on the Senate, circumvented this problem of Section 230. They recognize for 30 years some have been trying to make changes, but the money is too big on the hill. But when presented with this mountain of evidence from whistleblowers, from litigation, from leaked documents, the Senate acted, okay, with that evidence, and they created what I would call is more of a child protection bill than anything else. And this is a well-crafted piece of legislation to avoid these First Amendment problems and to avoid Section 230. Why? It focuses on conduct, not content. There is no First Amendment issue that is created from COSA that didn't already exist in the world in which we live. And so let's talk about that a little bit. As a threshold point about the First Amendment, much to big tech's chagrin, does not exist to preclude ever discussing behavior of whether it's big tech or anyone else. The First Amendment helps inform us to navigate what can be tricky issues at times when speech is involved, okay? But Congress specifically, and the Senate specifically, has drafted legislation not focused on speech, but focused on conduct, okay? And as Laura said, there's no liability in COSA for content sitting on your platform or for youth seeking that content. And don't take my word for it. Read the legislation, which says in the Senate version, this bill does not, quote, prevent or preclude any minor from deliberately or independently searching for or specifically seeking content. The claim that this will hurt First Amendment rights is simply misplaced. The only liability in this bill is when a company fails to, quote, do this crazy thing, exercise reasonable care in the creation and implementation of their features to prevent or mitigate harm for children. That's it. Every company in America functions like this. If they're going to create a product which they know children are going to use, they should be exercising reasonable care to try to make it safe. Now, make no mistake about the world that tech is trying to create. If this bill, if COSA, something that simply requires them not to prevent information from getting through to youth, not even to prevent harm, but instead to just use reasonable care in designing features. That's essentially the core of the bill. If Congress can't do that, then Congress can't pass any law. They just can't pass any law that people can create dangerous products for children and Congress's hands are tied. Now, surely that cannot be the case. With regard to the First Amendment, some of these arguments are, well, this bill could be abused. We could have a rogue government official or a rogue prosecutor who could take this language and use it against a platform or something. A couple points on that. First, that is always true. That has been true since the dawn of time. We have laws against fraud, for example. Could a rogue prosecutor or a government official decide to accuse someone of something that is fraudulent when they actually haven't acted fraudulently? Sure, they can. What's our solution when that occurs? We go to the courts and it gets dealt with. We don't decide, hey, we better not make fraud illegal because, gosh, that statute could be used against us. That's just not how it works. We have laws in place and we have a constitution in place to protect us. And lastly, with regard to the Constitution, let me say this. It is very clear in Supreme Court jurisprudence that Congress is well within its powers to do something like simply require platforms to design their features safely. And they said I'm going way back to the 1980s, before all this, it is evident beyond the need for elaboration that the state's interest in safeguarding the physical and psychological well-being of minors is compelling. This bill empowers families. It takes away tech's ability to feed people information that they don't want, but it provides no liability if somebody goes out and seeks the information. That is not a constitutional problem. This law does not require harmful content not to get through. It simply requires tech companies to function the same way every other company does and use reasonable care. And that has got to be constitutional.
Yes, Mary, I'm here cheering you on. That's exactly what we're calling for. It's common sense. Ben, over to you.
Well, I have a hard time finding anything to add to Mary's presentation, but I will say this. When I think of this law, I think of it as more akin to a products liability law. If you design a product that hurts people, it's quite irrelevant that it also plays Mozart or quotes Hamlet or broadcasts a podcast. If you design a car without seatbelts and a kid is injured in the car, does it matter if the radio is playing Hamlet or a podcast of Elon Musk or anything else? If a hardware store sells poison to a child and the child is injured, does it matter that the packaging that held the poison was quoting Hamlet or there was a podcast or playing Mozart? The answer is no. You focus on the harm that this law is very much like a zoning law. In the law, we call them time, place, and manner laws, which are content neutral. Cities today are free to zone hardcore porn outlets away from schools, away from playgrounds, away from libraries, because of the negative secondary consequences that result from that particular activity at that location. The government can pass laws that limit the noise level of demonstrations, pure free speech activities, but you can't do it in a way that causes harm to a community. You can ban free speech demonstrations early in the morning or late at night, not because you disagree with the speech, but because it causes injury to the residents and the nearby people. That's what this law is very much about. The notion that it violates the First Amendment is preposterous. I've been litigating constitutional law for well past 40 years, and Don had to laugh. You did mention that I worked with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I knew Mike when he was a young lawyer. He worked for me at Alliance Defending Freedom. He's a brilliant lawyer. He's a brilliant constitutional lawyer, and I think he knows that it doesn't violate the Constitution as well. If folks in his office are listening to this, please let him listen to this podcast or this webinar, because I think he would be reminded of some of the illustrations that we've used. Let me talk about one case in particular that we're litigating at the NCOSE Law Center. We represent two 13-year-old boys that fell in love online with a 16-year-old girl. It was probably the most beautiful girl they thought they had ever seen. And they started exchanging. Well, she sent the boys explicit pictures of herself. They took pictures of themselves. They sent them back to the girl. The girl elevated and sent them even more explicit pictures. The boy did the same. Then the girl started trying to extort them. The boys cut the girl off. A year or so later, the girl turned out to be, we believe, a pedophile, a predator, a man, not a 16-year-old girl at all, posted the images on X, or Twitter, as it used to be called. Now, Twitter has a policy, very well publicized policy, that has a zero tolerance policy for child pornography, known as CSAM. We know, as a matter of fact, that on any given day, there are thousands of child porn images that are bought, sold, and traded on Twitter. They're monetized by Twitter through advertising. Child pornography is not even speech. Yet, the online platforms like Twitter claim that CDA 230 block these civil lawsuits against them. Well, this particular law, NCOSE, would go a long way to influencing platforms like X and TikTok and some of the others we've heard about today to design their models so that they don't have algorithms that cause children to be addicted to the content that they see, that addictive behavior and compulsive behavior is not the target, as it is right now, or the purpose of many of these algorithms that are designed to keep children from watching on and on and on and not getting off. There are folks at these platforms that are they're experts in manipulative behavior, manipulating children, and the platforms are designed to keep the kids on there to the point where they engage in bad behavior, whether it's suicidal or being introduced to the wrong people, to exchanging pictures of themselves with the wrong people they think are other children, and they're not. They turn out to be pedophiles and extortionists. Please pass NCOSE. We badly need it. It's probably the single most important piece of legislation, certainly since 1997. The Communications Decency Act was supposed to take care of this. The part that did take care of much of this was held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 2004. The Supreme Court basically was incorrect in that ruling. But in any event, I think NCOSE will go a long way to protecting kids and giving parents a tool to help kids. You can talk about parents being responsible for their kids' behavior online. The point was made that there are billions of dollars being made to lure children in and keep children on the internet. That's an unequal battle that parents are always going to lose, especially when kids can go next door and look at their friends' devices and so on. NCOSE passes constitutional muster. As I said, I spent a career litigating against government, state, federal, and local, and I would bet my own reputation that NCOSE will pass constitutional muster, especially if it goes to the Supreme Court. We've heard Justice Thomas talking about the need for protections for children and the overreading and the misinterpretation of CDA 230. Hopefully with COSA and other litigation, it'll come along, that gap will be filled. But Dawn, COSA passes muster. Mary O'Leary's correct, and my heart breaks for the parents that are on this podcast and webinar. Can't hear you.
Question I have for you. Thank you, Ben, Mary. So this correctly. Children's First Amendment rights are protected, but it's not equal to that of adults. The question is, how is it not equal? And could that potentially help parents have more control as to what their own children see and listen to while online?
Well, the Supreme Court has held multiple times that the state or the government is permitted to restrict expression accessible to children that would be otherwise protected for adults. In other words, sexually explicit material can be banned for kids, which might not be legally obscene and permitted and protected by the First Amendment for adults.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Mary might want to add to that, but the government is given far more leeway to restrict the content of material to children. But COSA doesn't really regulate content. It regulates design features like products liability. The fact that speech is implicated is beside the point. If it hurts kids, it's not content-based.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question maybe to you first, Laura, but others are welcome to answer. What is the impact of COSA on online privacy?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just looking at both the questions. So on online privacy, I mean, and part of the issue is, excuse me, there is no impact, right? So COSA does not require companies to get any information they don't already have. And one of the crazy things when we talk about privacy is it's the company's current practices that are already invading our privacy. I mean, it's what they collect and what they do with that. But there is nothing in COSA that will require these companies to go out and collect more information. So in that regard, I don't believe it does impact privacy. And I'm actually going to loop this to the question that was above it because they're related, which has to do with age verification. Because I think the big privacy concern is, well, aren't they going to have to require ID, age verification? COSA has one of the edits that was made, I believe, in early 2023. It explicitly says nothing in this act requires age verification, identity verification. But the other big piece that I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that we are missing here is we don't need people to check ID. We just need these companies to be required to act on the knowledge they already have. And so part of this is, you know, when we have young people who sign up as a 42-year-old, the current issue is that these companies have algorithms. They know that they're not 42. They know they're under 18. And then they begin to target them that way. So it is very counterintuitive, but I often will tell parents, look, if I can't stop you from letting your child go on these platforms, please do me a favor and go open the account yourself. Open the Snapchat, open the Instagram, put in your real age, act like an adult, use the account for a month. Whatever as a parent you can do so that these companies believe you're an adult. It's counterintuitive, right? Normally, if you say you're an adult, you can buy alcohol, you can buy cigarettes, you can do these things. But because they are targeting children and that is the attention they're trying to get, it is more dangerous for kids. And so when these platforms know that it's a kid, it is a more dangerous experience. And I'll give you one quick example. I've talked to hundreds of young girls. When they opened Instagram, when they opened a Snapchat, they got all kinds of messages from predatory users. They got explicit photos. They were being solicited. You know, the craziest thing is that I have talked to dozens of adult women who open Snapchats and Instagrams, and none of them have had that experience. And more recently, I have talked to young women, young adults, 18 to 24. Now, not dozens, but let's say 10. Every one of them, when we go back and we look at what their experience was, they're blown away when they realize, oh my God, like I stopped getting those types of random messages around ages 16 to 18, right? That's the programming piece. Because if I want engagement, then I'm not going to send a 35-year-old predator the data. I'm not going to recommend or push to them 42-year-old women. I'm going to push 13-year-old girls. And look, that is if you think about everything I've just said, it is deeply disturbing. It is matchmaking for predators, and that is what they are doing to our children, because there is no reason that two people who act exactly the same, but one is 14 and one is 42, are being treated so vastly different.
Laura, let me ask you this one too about the FTC. So does COSA increase the power reach of the FTC as you understand it?
Yeah, so I am not an expert on the FTC, but I don't see how COSA would. I mean, you know, and honestly, I mean, I would love, frankly, to see it get under the like the Food and Drug Administration, right? I'd love to see, I'd love to see anything we can do to rein in these companies. Kids are dying, and we've got to do something. But within COSA itself, I mean, it's giving the FTC a mechanism to go through and pursue these issues. And frankly, that process can be slow sometimes, right? I mean, if anything, that's why we need consumers, Americans, parents, to be able to hold these companies accountable, to be able to say, hey, look, here's my kid's data. And that's what's really critical about that. And that's why state laws matter. And it's so important, because ultimately, and this is maybe not popular opinion, but you know, the FTC has a lot of ability to go in and investigate. But at the end of the day, we're talking money. And a couple $1 billion is like Mark Zuckerberg's Christmas bonus. It's not going to incentivize these companies to stop harming children because it is so wildly profitable for them to do so. I want to add one other thing that we haven't really talked about, which is competition and fair competition. One of the things people don't realize, you know, COSA will open the field for ethical designers. It will give engineers and other companies a chance to compete, because currently, the 6 or so companies that occupy the field entirely, because they're making harmful addictive products, there's no competition, right? You can't get in there and be selling cigarettes that don't have anything addictive in them when people are addicted to the nicotine. That is what we're seeing with apps. And so one of the things COSA will do that will be great for our economy, that will be great from both sides, is that it will give people an opportunity to compete. It will give consumers a choice. When children are not addicted, they can decide, actually, I want to go check out that app instead. That doesn't exist currently.
Yeah, that would change a lot of things. Brandon, do you want to add some comments?
Yeah, you know, one of these questions was asking, has anyone met with PITA or with Meta, and what are the objections? I often say, if we look back and if we just simply, because the way this is operating is big tech is the equivalent of big tobacco 30 years ago. And that battle, we saw how much these companies knew that they were causing harm to our children, and they continued to push. And we saw how much lobbying it took, and how many years and how many people have died since then. I mean, just earlier, I took my screen off for a minute because I'm addicted to cigarettes. You know, I had to get in a cigarette and I didn't want it to be on screen. These companies are using these addictive algorithms. They know the problem. They're just smarter. The difference is that they are lobbying the left and the right to spread false information, and backing it up with special interests.
Yeah.
I want to add to that, you know, it is about money. And one of the things when the Facebook whistleblower came forward, one really important thing she explained is that the way that these companies structured internally, their integrity teams, when they are making safety related proposals, they must establish that those proposals will not negatively impact engagement, right? So if I want to put in a safety feature, I have to show this safety feature you won't lose any money. That's a really high bar. Conversely, and this is critical, folks, their product development teams have no such duties with regard to safety. That is a real problem, because what that means is they're launching products with no regard to safety, and that's it. It's about the money. And I referenced the public documents, the Facebook documents. Please go out and take a look at those, because you will see example after example where what I just described occurs, where somebody says, hey, we could make something safer this way. And the answer is no, it'll hurt engagement. It's a money issue.
John, one quick thing. Everything that's been said on this webinar, big tech knows. it probably doesn't disagree with a thing anybody has said. What they'll do is they'll basically change the topic, come in from the side, or have these private hallway meetings with legislators and increase contributions. None of what we said during this entire session is a secret. It's been told to Congress. It's out in the public. Everybody knows about it. The only person that won't act on it is Congress. Now is the time.
Thank you. Andy and Rhonda, would you like to say some closing remarks?
Yes, thank you. They say hindsight is 20/20. If Rhonda and I know now about the social media platform and other activities, we would still have Cruise. And we founded a Cruise for Life Foundation with our primary mission to save one child's life. And our discussions and rallies and such, I definitely tried to relate to the parents a few important facts that the first, yes, it can happen to you, as Rhonda and I thought this would never happen to our children. The same thing is the parental monitoring of your children's social media devices or your electronic devices are very, very imperative. Rhonda and I attempted to do that months before we lost Cruise. And I tell you what, it was such a challenge for us. I do not recommend any parent to purchase an iPhone, as it has a 6-digit code, and it was impossible for, again, it took a long time for it to crack the code as Cruise had changed it on us. But, you know, with this discussion, I've heard a few times that these big tech social media platforms, they need to be held accountable. We need to get this message out to the makers of these bills who vote and pass these laws that they're being manipulated by the language. It needs to be taught and discussed and straightforward, just like you're doing on this Zoom meeting today. It's very clear what these bills COSA is asking for. Ron and I are behind this 100%. We can get this passed. There's a multitude, millions of children whose lives could be saved. But that's all I have to say. And Rhonda, would you care to jump in?
I would agree, right? I think we definitely need more laws for our children to have access to their phones when needed. The big tech corporations should not be shielded from anything, because they are a large part of the problem.
And one thing that's closing out, just one more thing. Several years ago, I was doing a lot of traveling for business for my work. And in order to keep touch with my children, I was kind of curious what they were looking at in social media platforms, because we thought they were safe. We were naive parents. They said, Snapchat, Dad. So they taught me how to log in, and I created a password and screen name. I guess I told them the truth, my true age, because I thought my experience, it was fine. I thought it was a very safe platform. JC and Cruz and I, we would communicate quite often and make Google faces at each other and such. So I was the fool. They held their horrible, freakish activities away from me, or else I would have taken the kids off this immediately. But I thought it was a safe social media platform. Again, thank you.
Thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Andy and Rhonda. As we've discussed, until now, parents and families have been unable to access justice for their children due to tech's complete immunity. This has to change. COSA is about conduct, not content. COSA will not stand in the way of the First Amendment protections. The Kids Online Safety Act must pass this session. We can't wait one more day, let alone another session for vital protections on dangerous platforms. We ask you to help us by going to your boss, asking them to co-sponsor this bill, and to urge House leadership to bring it to a vote. If you're not here representing a congressional office, we ask you to keep those calls and keep those emails going. I know we're not getting responses constantly, but those messages, they make such a huge difference, and we need all we can get. There's only a few days left of this Congress. We have to push them to bring it forward. I'm going to say goodbye now. We have a short video to play a little bit more about COSA, but we will send a recording of this to you. You're welcome to send it and pass it along to others on the Hill. Thank you for being with us. 25 years. That's how long it's been since Congress last addressed online child safety.
Platforms like Instagram facilitate sextortion. Here's a man, a representative from South Carolina. His son died by suicide within 6 hours of being approached by a predator who was disguised as a teenage girl on Instagram.
17-year-old son, Gavin Guffey, to suicide due to sextortion, July 27th of 2022. And it's my mission now to make sure that these companies care more about people than they do profits.
This has to end. Instagram and all the rest of these big tech platforms know what's happening, but they want to make money off of kids. It's got to end. There are no more excuses.
We've seen unspeakable horrors unfold. Children exploited, abused, and manipulated in ways that we could never have imagined. But there is hope. The Senate has already passed the Kids Online Safety Act, almost unanimously. Think about that. In this divided time, they all agreed on one thing. Big tech must step up to protect our children. Now it's time for the House to act. We can't wait any longer.
Now we need to get COSA through the House. And why is COSA so important? COSA establishes a duty of care for platforms to consider children in how they're designed. It's a duty of care over a duty of profit, okay? That's what we need them to be focusing on. And it also provides essential safeguards like turning off geotagging, turning off direct messaging between adults and minors, because who thought that was a good idea? Okay, we need some serious reforms. What's our action here? Ask the House to pass COSA. Thank you. Woo! Pass COSA.
Reach out to the House leadership right now. Right now! Urge them to bring COSA to the floor.
1 year ago, it wasn't as bad as it was today. 5 years ago, it was not as bad as it is today. And 20 years ago, it most certainly wasn't as bad as it is today.
These were the top 3 platforms mentioned by minors in victim reports for sextortion. Instagram, Snapchat, and Wiz. These are the top 3 by a huge margin.
They're holding images of their children that were lost due to big tech harms. These are foreseeable, known harms that the platforms knew they were inflicting on children, but refused to do anything about.
Tech is doing all they can to stop this critical solution. Their tactic now, just stall and run out the clock so there's no time to vote.
From the age of 12 years old, from the age of 10 years old. And we need to have this conversation every day.
Thank you for standing with us, for believing in this mission, and for being part of this journey. Together, we will continue to radiate hope and catalyze change.
This is the movement to end sexual exploitation.
This is a coalition that we're building here today.